We recently learned from the National Security Director, U.S. Director of National Intelligence, that Iran is funding and promoting anti-Israel protests in America. They want to disrupt America. So these protesters burn American flags even on the 4th of July. And I wish to salute the fraternity brothers at the University of North Carolina who protected the American flag against these anti-Israel protesters. For all we know, Iran is funding the anti-Israel protests that are going on right now outside this building. Not that many, but they're there, and throughout the city. Well, I have a message for these protesters. When the tyrants of Tehran, who hang gays from cranes and murder women for not covering their hair, are praising, promoting, and funding you, you have officially become Iran's useful idiots. Some of these protesters, it's amazing, absolutely amazing. Some of these protesters hold up signs proclaiming gays for Gaza. They might as well hold up signs saying chickens for KFC. These protesters chant from the river to the sea, but many don't have a clue what river and what sea they're talking about. They not only get an F in geography, they get an F in history. They call Israel a colonialist state. Don't they know that the land of Israel is where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob prayed, where Isaiah and Jeremiah preached, and where David and Solomon ruled? For nearly 4,000 years, the land of Israel has been the homeland of the Jewish people. It's always been our home. It will always be our home. It's not only the campus protesters who get it wrong. It's also the people who run those campuses. 80 years after the Holocaust, the presidents of Harvard, Penn, and I'm ashamed to say my alma mater, MIT, couldn't bring themselves to condemn the calls for the genocide of Jews. You remember what they said? They said, it depends on the context. Well, let me give these befuddled academics a little context. Anti-Semitism is the world's oldest hatred. For centuries, the massacre of Jews was always preceded by wild accusations. We were accused of everything from poisoning wells, to spreading plagues, to using the blood of slaughtered children to bake Passover matzahs. These preposterous anti-Semitic lies led to persecution, mass murder, and ultimately to history's worst genocide, the Holocaust. Now, just as malicious lies were leveled for centuries at the Jewish people, malicious lies are now being leveled at the Jewish state. No, don't applaud. Listen. The outrageous slanders that paint Israel as racist and genocidal are meant to delegitimize Israel, to demonize the Jewish state, and to demonize Jews everywhere. And no wonder we've witnessed an appalling rise of anti-Semitism in America and around the world. My friends, whenever and wherever we see the scourge of anti-Semitism, we must unequivocally condemn it and resolutely fight it, without exception. And don't be fooled when the blood libels against the Jewish state come from people who wear fancy silk robes and speak in lofty tones about law and justice. Here's a case in point. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has shamefully accused Israel of
8 Americans are still believed to be being held hostage in Gaza by the terrorists of Hamas. Israel and the United States government believe that 5 of those 8 are still alive. Today marks 292 days for parents, friends, and family members of those hostages without their loved ones. Joining us now from Capitol Hill, Rachel Goldberg-Polin and John Polin. They are the parents of the Israeli-American hostage Hersh Goldberg-Polin, along with Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa. Thanks to all of you for being here. Rachel, I'll start with you. You and John attended Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech. What was your main takeaway?
Look, as parents of one of the American 8, we were saddened, we were disappointed. We really wanted to hear that the Prime Minister was on the brink of signing this deal, or that he was going to announce, I have signed, or we are signing right now this first phase of the deal, just to get some movement going. And we didn't hear that. So we are laser focused, and that's obviously, as any parent can appreciate, our main objective. We didn't get that. And so we are continuing to be broken and moving forward and trying to be hopeful and optimistic.
And John, we interview a lot of hostage families on this show, and we've heard from many of them who believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't actually want a hostage deal anytime soon, so that the war continues. He gets to remain Prime Minister. I know you're reluctant to wade into the politics of this, but what's your assessment of it all?
My assessment is that the Prime Minister wants to do a deal. I think he understands that there could be no victory without bringing home the hostages. I think that as the son of an historian and somebody who himself appreciates history, the Prime Minister understands that his legacy is going to be very much shaped by whether or not he's able to bring home these hostages. So I know he wants to get this done. As all of the families, what we're trying to push on is Dr. King's fierce urgency of now. And we need this to happen in the next few days. We believe there's an opportunity. And so we hope that that's going to happen. And hopefully today's speech solidified the support from both sides of the aisle that we know has been present, but that we think that the Prime Minister is going to take out of Washington this week. And it's going to give him the energy and everything he needs to go out and get this deal done imminently.
Senator Ernst, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been accused of making the speech just to shore up support back home, domestically, back in Israel. He's also been accused of trying to stoke division in the U.S. domestically, because obviously his leadership is not universally praised, shall we say. I think about 80 Democrats from Congress did not attend. Many of them were at meeting with hostage families. How do you see it all?
Well, I do think it's important that the Prime Minister lay out for the United States what his plan is to return not only the American 8, but also all of the hostages. And we also did hear a little bit about the day after plan, what he hopes to accomplish as soon as the war concludes. I was able to briefly speak with him after this speech and asked him please to get the American 8 hostages home as quickly as possible. And he did respond that they are working on it. And I also think that the United States needs to shape and influence where we can. We should not tell Israel Israel how to run the war, but certainly we can shape and influence, because we cannot forget that nearly 40 Americans were killed on October 7th. 8 of them were taken hostage, among those Hirsch. So we need to do what we can as America to help Israel find a way to win this war and bring our hostages home.
Well, Senator, given the fact that more than 40 Americans were killed on October 7th and 8 Americans are being held hostage, what do you make of the protesters outside the Capitol today? I don't know what you saw in terms of images or video, but an American flag was burned. Somebody spray painted on the statue of Christopher Columbus outside Union Station. Hamas is coming with one of those red triangles, which is a target indication for Hamas to hit. These are presumably Americans in the street. What's your reaction?
Well, we do know that Iran funds a number of these demonstrations through many means and secondary and tertiary groups that claim to be maybe nonprofits. So I would say Iran is really stoking the fire here in the United States. Let's never forget that they chant death to Israel as well as death to America. It's a really sad situation. I appreciate that we have our First Amendment right to protest, but to do it peacefully and not destroying other people's property. So it's really unfortunate that we see this. And I think that many of those protesters don't fully understand the loss of American life on October 7th. They probably have no idea that 8 Americans are being held by Hamas. Hirsch, we know, was badly injured by Hamas on October 7th, and he has yet to be released. So I would just challenge those that are out there protesting. Do they truly know what they are protesting for and who they are protesting for?
Rachel, what is it like for you to see those protesters? I think Senator Ernst's interpretation of their ignorance is, some might say, charitable. What do you think?
Look, I think part of living in a democracy is that you have the right to express your opinions, and I don't have to agree with your opinions, and you don't have to agree with my opinions. And I think that that is part of the vibrancy of living in a place like America, where many places in the world you don't have that ability to express yourself. And I do agree with the senator that unfortunately I think many of the people, not all, but many of the people protesting don't even understand the core source and the real very textured, complicated background and history of this conflict.
John, tell us about Hirsch. What do you miss most about him right now?
So there's so many things that I miss about Hirsch all day, every day, but what it boils down to is I miss what I would call the simple moments in life. Sitting around the dinner table, sitting at the breakfast table, just relaxing on the couch at night. Hirsch is a guy who really is universally liked, or I would even say loved, by people of all ages. And it's not because he has a need to be a big personality or to take over a room. He doesn't walk in a room and immediately make his presence known, but he, in not a long period of time after walking in, will have made his way into everybody's hearts. And we hope we'll be home soon. And we always say, we're not looking to go to Disney World or anything big. We want to get him home, and we want to relax at home quietly, and with all due respect, Jake, not be talking to you much more.
Right.
Well, I'm not going to take offense at that because I know how you mean it, but we're going to keep covering Hirsch and the other 4 Americans and the other hostages, and I know it's not easy to talk about. I can't imagine what you're going through, but thanks to you guys, and thank you, Senator Ernst, for talking to us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake.
Here are the names of the 5 Israeli-American hostages thought to still be alive in Gaza. 20-year-old Eden Alexander, 22-year-old Omer Nutra, 23-year-old Hirsch Goldberg Poland, whose parents you just heard from, 35-year-old Sigi Dekel-Chen, and 65-year-old Keith Samuel Siegel, whose wife we interviewed yesterday. We do all hope that they get home soon and there is peace in the region.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just gave a fiery speech in front of a U.S. Congress deeply divided over the war in Gaza. That speech earlier today. Our chief national security correspondent, Alex Marquardt, is joining us right now. Alex, as you know, there was a lot of speculation about how partisan this speech would be, like his speech back in 2015 at Congress. What happened today?
Well, Wolf, and that's because that speech 9 years ago was quite bombastic, and the Obama-Biden administration was furious afterwards. This time, it was not nearly as partisan. There was a lot of thanks for the U.S. for their support of Israel, particularly during this war in Gaza. There was a lot of thanks for both President Biden and President Trump. He spent a lot of time, Netanyahu did, speaking about the hostages and bringing them home. Critics of Netanyahu say that he's not doing nearly enough to bring them home. In fact, that he's delaying it. I have just learned, Wolf, from a source that there are talks about getting the negotiations back up and running early next week with the top mediators, including the CIA Director Bill Burns. Now, as Netanyahu was speaking, protests were raging on the streets of Washington. We've seen these anti-Israel protests for months. Netanyahu painted these anti-Israel protesters as supporters of Hamas and pawns of Iran. Take a listen.
Many anti-Israel protesters, many choose to stand with evil. They stand with Hamas. They stand with rapists and murderers. You have officially become Iran's useful idiots.
Useful idiots, that's going to be one of the phrases remembered from this speech. Now, he is referencing newly released U.S. intelligence that says that Iran has been fomenting and financing some of these anti-Israel protests here in the U.S. But that intelligence, notably, Wolf, goes on to say that Americans who participate in these protests are in good faith expressing their views on the conflict in Gaza. Now, Netanyahu also pushed back on the civilian death toll and the lack of aid for Palestinians in Gaza. Take a listen to this.
Despite all the lies you've heard, the war in Gaza has one of the lowest ratios of combatants to non-combatants casualties in the history of urban warfare. If there are Palestinians in Gaza who aren't getting enough food, it's not because Israel is blocking it, it's because Hamas is stealing it.
Now, Wolf, a bit of a fact check there. The death toll in Gaza is believed to be close to 40,000. Even if we take out the number of Hamas militants Israel has argued that they have killed, some 14,000, the civilian death toll is still more than 1% of the overall population of Gaza, likely higher. That is shockingly high, Wolf. As far as the aid goes, U.S. officials continue to argue that it is Israel's military operation that makes it very difficult for the aid to be distributed and has caused a breakdown in the security in the Gaza Strip. Wolf.
Jonathan, you came from this address. You were in the hall in the House chamber. What was your impression of the speech, knowing that he had multiple audiences there?
Yeah, it was pretty extraordinary, Deanna. I mean, to be there in the chamber, watching Prime Minister Netanyahu deliver those remarks, there were a few things that stood out for me. Number one, it was a unity message. Like literally you had Democrats and Republicans standing up and applauding. You know, I thought there was going to be lots of empty seats. There simply weren't. It was a pretty full House. And he complimented President Biden and praised him, as Jamie said, and he complimented President Trump for the Abraham Accords. So he was sort of finding a way to praise both sides. That's number one. Number two, he talked about anti-Semitism. He talked about what's happening on our college campuses and what's happening in the streets, and how that is not just about protesting policies of the government. You're seeing people going after Zionists and Jews. And literally, while he was speaking, outside the Capitol, you had people burning American flags in front of Union Station. I saw signs as I came over here to the studio, people saying things like, any resistance is justified. I mean, comparing that kind of language, when you think about the babies who were burned and the women who were raped. So he talked about that. That was important. And then thirdly, I think he laid out a path forward. He talked about hostages and the needs to get them home. Then he talked about what a future could look like for Israel and a demilitarized Gaza, like a vision of peace. That to me was really quite welcome.
But there were a lot of dozens of Democrats boycotted the speech, didn't show up. A lot of those seats where the Democrats would have been seated were congressional staffers just showing up and sitting there.
You know, there may have been some empties, but I watched Hakeem Jeffries stand and applaud. I watched Chuck Schumer stand and applaud. I watched almost every Democratic senator stand and applaud. So I hear what you're saying, but I got to say, I saw unity in that room. I saw him try to appeal to both sides, and I saw people from both parties respond.
What you do at the ADL is try to stamp out hate.
Of course.
Anti-Semitism, hate against
Racism,
Islamophobia,
all of it,
Islamophobia, racism, all of it. How do you think that Netanyahu's attempt to do that in his speech is going to play. I mean, I was getting a text from one American Jew who said, okay, it's fine to call people useful idiots, but how about like a slight nod to people who are genuinely upset about the what's happening in Gaza?
Well,
and understanding that you're also seeing the signs that you just described,
Totally.
which is just plain hate.
And he talked about the director of national intelligence acknowledging a few weeks ago that Iran is involved in these protests, something we've been seeing at ADL for a long time. But he did something very interesting, Deanna. Before the speech really got started, he called out some of the folks that he had brought over as part of his delegation, including, for example, a Bedouin soldier, which was interesting because I think most Americans don't realize there are Israeli Muslims in the IDF. And then he had an Ethiopian Israeli soldier who ran 8 miles on October the 7th. So I point this out because he demonstrated the diversity of Israeli society. And I think you pointed this out earlier in a way that surprised a lot of people. He could have come with just decorated Jewish veterans. He didn't do that. He brought a more diverse delegation, and I think that sends a message.
I just, to push back just a little bit about all the unity, you know, several Israelis from both sides of the aisle were texting me during the speech. And what I heard from them is that that was, in effect, a very celebratory speech that really does not fit, and that there is an alternate reality on the ground that's going on both in Gaza and in Israel.
Right.
As we know, in the north, 60,000 plus Israelis are displaced. There has been an extraordinary impact on the economy. And then, of course, there is the devastating reality of the number of deaths in Gaza, Palestinians, the humanitarian disaster. So he had a welcome audience there today, but he did ignore what I'm hearing from Israelis is a very dire reality on the ground.
Look, there is no question that that is an incredibly difficult situation. And every civilian life lost is a tragedy. Every Palestinian woman or child who is killed inadvertently, no matter what the IDF tries to do, that is a tragedy. We should mourn every one of those deaths. But he talked about, for example, the dire situation in Gaza and how they're trying to bring in supplies. He talked about the situation in the north, like you're pointing out, and the need to bring those people back to their homes, 60 or 80,000 Israelis. And he talked about the need to bring the hostages home. I know at ADL, again, we're focused on fighting hate here at home, but we all wear the dog tags because we want these civilians, these innocent people back, including, by the way, dozens of Americans. I think, maybe it's 8 Americans at this point. So I think he tried to address that, Jamie, but look, if you've lost a child, I think about my friends, the Polans. I was with the Nurchas before we came on. Their sons are both held in Gaza. I can't even begin to grasp the unspeakable pain they deal with every day. We have got to get those kids home. So I hope they get a deal very fast so we can see Omer and we can see Hirsch back home safe and sound, and all the hostages once and for all.
Let's hope there's a deal that will bring those hostages home as quickly as possible. Jonathan Greenblatt, thanks very much. Jamie, thanks to you as well. I want to go to CNN's Miguel Marquez. He's been covering the demonstrators out there in the streets of Washington. Jamie, give us a sense of what's been going on.
Lots and lots of demonstrators and protesters throughout the Capitol, around the Capitol building. But I want to show you, it's all ended here at Union Station. This is the remnants of one U.S. flag that was burned here. Over in the distance there, you can see the ashes there. That's the remnants of another flag. I want to show you sort of the bell over here, though, the copy of the Liberty Bell that's out in front of the station. That's been covered in graffiti. And then the Columbus Memorial has also been covered in graffiti here. And Jonathan, if you could show all 3 U.S. flags on the 3 flagpoles, massive flagpoles out in front of Union Station have been pulled down, and Palestinian flags have been put up in their place. Most of the protesters, there's a few dozen, maybe 100 or so still gathered here. Most of the protesters have left, but you can see the number of police officers in front of Union Station. And I'm looking over across the way here, and there are lots of police with shields now and heavy vehicles. So it looks like most of the protesters are leaving, and police will come back in and bring this place back to order. Wolf.
All right, Miguel, let's hope it's peaceful over there. Miguel Marquez reporting for us. Thanks very much, Dana.
Thank you so much. And with us now is Republican Senator John Thune of South Dakota. Senator, thank you so much for being here. Really great to see you and to have you here. First, generally speaking, your reaction to Prime Minister Netanyahu's remarks.
Strong speech, and as is usually the case with the Prime Minister, very well articulated. And I thought he hit all the right points, Dana. I think the one thing that he needs to do for people in this country, and for that matter, people all around the world, is connect the dots back to Iran. And the fact that Israel is the only thing standing between Iran and the United States, which they consider to be the Great Satan. And so Iran is behind all the malign activities in that region, whether it's Hezbollah in the north or the Houthis in Yemen, or Hamas right there in the Gaza Strip. But I thought he was really effective in that in particular, and also articulating a vision of what it could look like in the future if you had an integrated Middle East and a de-radicalized, demilitarized Gaza. And that, of course, means that you've got to get rid and eliminate Hamas.
I want to get back to what you were just talking about, and back to the Prime Minister's speech in a second. I'm not sure if you were able to hear our reporter, Miguel Marquez, who was talking about the protesters outside. Specifically, he was reporting on and showing the American flag being lowered, the Palestinian flag being raised. We even saw some red triangles. We're showing it now. I don't know if you can see it, but we even saw some red triangles on some of the statues. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think it's disgraceful, it's shameful, and the kind of thing that we shouldn't see in this country. But again, as the Prime Minister pointed out today, a lot of these activities that are happening here in the United States, Iran is behind them. They are trying to create tumult and instability and chaos, and fueling all these protests and the violence, particularly the anti-Semitic violence in this country. That's Iranian activity, and that's why they have to be stopped, and that's why it's so important that we continue to support Israel, including, as the Prime Minister said, give us the tools faster and we will finish the job. They've got to get this thing over with, and send a clear statement to the world that this kind of behavior and the kind of thing that we're seeing right here in the U.S. and right here in this city today just can't be tolerated.
Senator, one of Prime Minister Netanyahu's predecessors, Ehud Barak, who we understand, and we should tell our viewers who might not know, is not from the same party as Prime Minister Netanyahu. But nonetheless, he's somebody who has been intimately involved in trying to get to peace. He almost got there when Bill Clinton had him and Yasser Arafat in 2000 here in the United States. He said very, very strongly and very clearly to Wolf that he does not believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu actually wants to end the war, because it would mean the end of his own political viability at home. And that might even mean that hostages stay longer. Are you concerned about, I mean, you're a politician, you understand what's going on in Israel. Are you concerned about the notion that Bibi Netanyahu isn't trying as hard as he can to get this deal because of his own concerns about his own future?
I don't think that. I've met with him in Israel. I've met with Ehud Barak in Israel previously as well, and obviously they have political differences there. But those aside, my sense coming out of this is he is desperate to end this, because this is putting the lives of Israeli citizens at risk every single day.
He continued to bring it back to Iran, the country that is, by all accounts, funding and supporting not just Hamas in Gaza, but Hezbollah in the north, in Lebanon, and the Houthis. So this was another really important overarching theme, you know, that Netanyahu understandably has been obsessed with, the growth and the strength and the determination of Iran to eradicate Israel. And what he did here was to continue to connect for an American audience and an Israeli audience, but Israel doesn't need to be educated on this, but more for an American audience, that Iran isn't just out for Israel. Iran is out for to topple American democracy.
No, that's right. And he called the protesters Iran's useful idiots. He relished going after the protesters, saying that they didn't realize, didn't know the history, know the context, know how oppressive the Iranian regime is, and he relished it. I mean, this was, he was going after these protesters, going after the leaders of some of these schools. He called them befuddled academics. We're 10 months into this conflict. We're 100 days out from a presidential election. In some ways, the conflict has fallen off the radar of many Americans. It's going to start back up, right? If you think about what's happening in the context of some of these campus protesters, they're going to go back to school. There's going to be a DNC convention in Chicago, expected to be a lot of protesters there. So this is very much going to be top of mind heading into this election. And we don't quite know. We don't have, an idea yet of what Trump would really do in office. It's something he hasn't really detailed. And we also don't know what a Kamala Harris administration would do and how that would be different from a Biden administration.
What did you think of that reception he received in the Congress, though? That was powerful.
It was powerful. Listen, and these are Republicans, mostly. A lot of the Democrats didn't come, although some Democrats were there and they were standing up and cheering. And listen, there is a sense that Americans do need to be more educated on what's going on there, on the history of anti-Semitism, on the ways in which anti-Semitic tropes led to the Holocaust. And so there was teachable moments, right, when he was trying to educate people in terms of the history.
Jeremy Diamond is in Israel. And Jeremy, I wanted to ask you about the hostages. And I talked to, right before this speech, to the parents of one of the Israeli and American hostages, Idan Alexander, and the parents were there. Other family members of hostages were there. We did see the Prime Minister call out some of them, acknowledge some of them, and then when it comes to the big question that they all have, when are my family members going to come home? He did promise that, but just like David and Barak were saying, not a lot new that we heard from him about getting to that point with a deal with Hamas, with the help of Qatar and America.
Yeah, that's right, Dan. I think the Israeli Prime Minister paid a lot of lip service to the issue of the hostages. He talked about it during a section of his speech. But if you look at the overall context of the speech, the overall content of what the Israeli Prime Minister said, he talked far, far more about achieving victory in this war against Hamas, about destroying Hamas's military capabilities, and vowing we will fight until we achieve victory. He said a phrase like that a few different times throughout the speech. He talked about that far more than he did this ceasefire agreement, which U.S. officials as well as Israeli officials have indicated to me in recent days is very much within reach. One official actually told me that it's now up to Israel, that it's now up to the Israeli Prime Minister effectively to decide whether or not he actually wants a deal. And as Barak was saying there, the Israeli Prime Minister has told his delegation to hold off on traveling to meet with the mediators and share Israel's latest response until after he meets with President Biden tomorrow, effectively pushing off that trip by the delegation most likely until after Shabbat, so that would probably be on Sunday. But I think beyond that, Dan, I think what we also need to do here is fact check a few key things that the Israeli Prime Minister said, because he made several claims here that attempted to not only defend the Israeli military's conduct in Gaza, but that also flew in the face of many of the facts on the ground. When he was talking about the ICC's claim that Israel is starving people of Gaza, he talked about big numbers of aid getting in, but there is just very, very clear evidence. You talk to any humanitarian organization that actually works on the ground in Gaza, the United Nations, and even when you look at Israel in the way that they have turned on and back off the faucet of aid to Gaza, there is clear evidence that Israel has not always allowed enough aid in, that they have not done enough to deconflict militarily, to provide safe routes for that aid to get in. And you also have to remember that ministers, members of Netanyahu's own government, called for starving the people of Gaza in the earliest days of the war. Then he also made this frankly laughable claim that there are practically no civilians who were killed in Rafah. I can think of several strikes in which civilians were killed. So that just doesn't even pass the smell test. And then he once again cited this West Point expert, John Spencer, claiming that Israel has the lowest civilian casualty ratio. You talk to any other expert on the conduct of militaries in warfare, including how the United States has carried out its campaigns, and they will all say that Israel has not taken nearly as many precautions as most modern militaries do in warfare in Gaza.